I was like disappointed in philosophy in general.
Then how can I create a winsome approach that would win people to that side because the idea is beautiful?
We yearn for freedom, but freedom hurts.
Yo, what up, everybody? Welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I am Troy Polidori.
And this week we have a guest on from the Wisecrack YouTube channel. If you're unfamiliar with Wisecrack, I actually do some work with them. I co-host one of their podcasts, a movie podcast called Show Me the Meaning, and then I also help produce and research for some of the online videos that they make, which are basically video essays about films, television, video games, some pop cultural figures and things like that, but all through a philosophical, sociological, critical theory lens. So Jared's going to come on and talk with us about doing philosophy for a popular audience, as well as a bunch of other shit. So we'll get to that.
Dude, Jared from Wisecrack coming on our little podcast. Is that like when Metallica comes and plays your garage?
That's right. Welcome to our garage. Here's a keg of shitty beer and a ping pong table and a shitty stereo deck, and we're going to blast some tunes. It might not be what you're used to, but fuck it. It'll still be fun.
All right, so our first segment, as always, is the Shitty Minutes. This is where one of us rants and raves about whatever it is that's grinding our gears this week. And Austin, the torch is yours. So what's got you all messed up this week?
So here's what I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound very negative, but so I'm going to hope that everybody will project or infuse positive affect into everything I'm saying, because I actually view this as being very positive, but it's going to sound negative. Now, that may sound like a contradiction, it may seem paradoxical, but just fucking bear with me, and then maybe it'll make some sense at the outset, or by the end. And if it doesn't, well, fuck it, it's the shitty minute, so it doesn't necessarily need to make sense. But I am going to basically say that I don't think that we are as positive as we should be towards self-destructive behavior. And what I mean by that is that, like, sometimes going full death drive and drinking for 2 days straight and smoking cigarettes and, you know, doing things that are generally viewed like when we watch movies where there's the character that's like, man, they're so self-destructive. They're just like sleeping around and they're not getting rest and they're drinking too much and they're smoking, and it's kind of like, yeah. I'm going to argue in praise of the self-destructive character in movies. And this actually came from, I watched this movie called Newness. Have you heard of Newness?
I have not.
It's by Drake Doremus. He's the guy that did Like Crazy, which was the Anton Yelchin, Felicity Jones, is that her name? The girl from Rogue One.
Yeah.
The lead that, yeah. I forget what her name is sometimes, but she's great. And then actually Jennifer Lawrence is in it as well. Jennifer Lawrence plays the girl that's like not the pretty girl that he doesn't choose. Well, no, she's a pretty girl, but he's the girl that like he doesn't choose. Like so that gives you like a time frame of when this film was made, like 2011 or something like that, 2012. But anyway, so this movie Newness is about like dating in the age of social media where all you want is like the new, right? And there's like a cute lesson at the end where it turns out that, you know, you don't just want the new, but even though you try to explore the new and go full hedonist, it doesn't work. But anyway, the female character is, I can't remember what I don't know how to say her name. It's like Laisha Costa, or it's the girl from Victoria, if you guys have seen Victoria, which was that like one-shot feature film set in like Berlin or some shit like that. But and then Nicholas Hoult is the dude character, and she's like the wreck. She's the one that she's like. I mean, they're both sleeping around, but like at one point they get into a fight, and the way that they characterize it is he's one way and she's self-destructive. And I remember looking at this and I was kind of thinking, well, yeah, she's self-destructive, but she's kind of doing her thing, and it kind of works out in the end, and it kind of creates this like crazy tension where they're able to come together. And I was thinking about this idea of self-destruction as I was walking down the street smoking a cigarette, and I was thinking, sometimes I just want to fucking smoke and do stuff that's harmful to my body. Like last night, I went to go get Indian food, and I was listening to music, I was listening to Run the Jewels 3, by the way, which was a recommendation from Michael on This Week in Hip Hop a long time ago. And I was listening to it, and I was like, man, I just want to fucking smoke and just go full death drive right now. And so I happened to have a pack of cigarettes because I was out this weekend, and I smoke when I drink sometimes. So I was like, but fuck it, I just want to smoke right now, even when I'm not drinking. And I was just thinking that I think maybe there's like an element of some productive creation that can take place through destructive behavior. Does that make sense?
Okay, so here's my concern, dude.
Okay.
This is our concern, dude. At what point is this just survivor bias? So you know how like you should never take advice from people who are extremely rich and successful because their advice or how they got there is likely a survivorship bias, right?
Yeah.
The means they took to get there may have been an accident or out of the norm. And so many people who did the same exact means may end up in the gutter somewhere. So at what point is this In Praise of Benders article, which you're developing in your mind right now, just survivor bias? And the majority of people who do this end up in a gutter and not with some like enlightenment at the end.
I mean, and I may end up in a gutter, right? Like that's
This is still in media res.
yeah, we're still in media res here. I could be the one in the gutter. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know, but if you're in the middle of it, it's like, this is water. I don't know anything else, right? So I can't make some sort of external statement about it right now because I'm in it. But I just feel like yeah, go ahead.
Are you claiming that there's just some opportunity in self-destruction? Because like there's a long history of that, right? Augustine is in the midst of debauchery, and that leads him towards religious enlightenment. The Buddha is in the midst of pure pleasure and ecstasy. But then,
do you ever read like Rimbaud?
No, I know the Rimbaud that has Sylvester Stallone in it though.
Yeah, that's the wrong Rambo, but that Rambo is badass too. Different kind of self-destruction, but he kind of, I guess he was a self-destructive figure as well, and he also caused other types of destruction. But no, so the French poet Rimbaud, so I don't know how you'd actually say it, but I've actually heard people call him Rambo, and I'm like, wait, what? In like academic circles, they're like, as Rambo says, I'm like, what? When did Rambo say that shit?
Damn, this conference is awesome.
Yeah, but he has this idea of the deregulation of the senses. And it's the idea of sort of scrambling, if you will, the senses of our everyday lived experience to, kind of reorient ourselves to the world. And I think there's something lovely about that. And so many people, I think, are afraid of that. And this is going to sound bad because I don't want to, like, recklessly advocate that people go out and harm themselves. But at the same time, I do think there is something about scrambling our identities or scrambling the presuppositions that we have or the feelings that we have towards things, whether it's anything from love relationships to political affiliations to family relationships, whatever, but to scramble those identities, I think there is something kind of freeing about that. And so I think, I don't know, we're just afraid of that, and maybe there's something good about a little bit of self-destruction. I mean, the Marxian project, and oh, fuck that, I'm going to go back even deeper than that. The Jesus project of taking up your cross daily and following him is an act of self-destruction. It's a literal act of completely denying who you are, what you think, what you believe, what you feel, and then recreating yourself afresh, right? And then what was the first miracle? He turned fucking water into wine. So he's advocating becoming a debauched self-destruct. Well, maybe not. Okay, that's taking it too far. But.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be careful about masochistic, like self-flagellation, though, right?
Do you? Or is there something good and productive about a little bit of masochism? Like, so there's a philosopher by the name of Nick Land that people talk a lot about in academic circles in not so positive remarks. But he's one of these guys that has gone down maybe like the bad route of scrambling of the self, right? Like there are stories, he used to work at a university in England, and there are stories about him that you never know how far they go, but I talked to some people that like worked with him and stuff, and they kind of corroborate these ideas that like he would go on benders and he would like sleep in his office, and there was a point where he like didn't have he wasn't paying rent or anything like that, but he was like popping pills and doing other random shit and going to like rave nights, and he's also a professor and academic, and he's just fully exploring, if you will, the flows as a Deleuzian, the flows of like excess and creation and stuff like that. But maybe he got a little lost, right? He might have gotten a little lost in the process. So I don't know if you want to go that far, but a little self-destruction is okay.
Yeah, I think maybe I would tailor that advice to being you're going to find yourself in the midst of self-destruction every once in a while because we're human beings and we have a death drive. So when you find yourself in that, there is opportunity in that. But probably don't seek it out.
Troy's being the responsible one here, which is good. And I'm going to say as a disclaimer, please don't go and do self-harm in any way. But if you want to smoke that cigarette, fucking smoke that cigarette. Don't be like, oh, smoking's bad. It kills. We're all going to fucking die. Enjoy the goddamn cigarette. It tastes good. Okay? Oh, I shouldn't have this drink. When people say I drank too much, like, oh, I drank too much. No, you didn't drink too much. You don't feel good, but that's okay. You didn't drink too much. You drank just the right amount to get yourself to where you could get the point where you had a great time and now you're hungover. Fucking stop judging yourselves and thinking that you like, oh, I shouldn't have done this. Now I'm tired. Fuck it. Who cares, man? Take a nap later. You're good.
That's a good thing you're not a therapist, Austin.
That is a good thing. All right, sweet. So we're going to get into our main segment this week. As we said at the beginning, we have a special guest this week, Jared from Wisecrack, or Meta Jared, as I sometimes refer to him on our other podcast. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, you guys. I've listened to quite a number of your episodes.
Ah.
I'm so sorry.
Well, right on. Well, we're stoked to have you, man. I guess we're going to kind of just have a sort of free-flowing conversation about philosophy. I'm sure we'll delve into film and stuff like that. But more importantly, I guess kind of gearing it towards doing philosophy for a popular audience. So if you could just tell a little bit about Wisecrack, what you guys do, maybe that'll be the best way to intro this discussion for the uninitiated that are listening.
Sure. So right now, Wisecrack is a digital media company. Most of our biggest presence is on YouTube. We also have presence on Facebook and also podcasting, where Austin is a regular contributor on our movie podcast. And basically, Wisecrack is it's always evolving, but initially, and what it is mostly today, it's a mixture of humanities appreciation / philosophy mixed with pop culture. We started off doing literature, then we went into philosophy and cinema criticism, and now we're mostly doing philosophy, cinema criticism. We did like a science pilot sort of thing about a month ago, and then we're continuing to explore that. We always go by the mantra of Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network. We don't even know what it is yet. So we're constantly just trying to reinvent, and push the boundaries and see what the brand can do and what it can't do, and continue to broaden the scope with more contributors that have diverse talents. And so, really, like, I see Wisecrack as hopefully more like a demeanor than necessarily something that's necessarily solely about philosophy or solely about literature or solely about the humanities. Similar to how like Vice is like the hipster brand, you could say. And I don't think we've quite found it yet. I don't know if the cultural zeitgeist is really in the appropriate place for Wisecrack to really find its movement necessarily. But I tend to idealistically think about it as just kind of like a demeanor towards living a thoughtful life. And it doesn't have to be, no offense to these two academics that I'm talking to here, but it doesn't have to be like Ivory Tower, super wanky. It can be just hopefully a more inviting way to encourage people to think critically.
I do have one quick question before we go any further. What happened to 8-Bit, man? 8-Bit Philosophy was a show that you guys used to do.
What happened to 8-Bit?
Yeah, what happened to 8-Bit Philosophy?
So it was, all these shows that we, like cancel or whatever, they're always prone to come back. With 8-Bit, it was just the most expensive show for us to make by far, and was also the one that performed the worst, at least for like a good year of us trying to keep the show going. So, yeah, basically, it's as simple as that, just business.
Wow, the people didn't know what they had. I remember 8-Bit was the reason I found out about Wisecrack in the first place.
Me too.
Yeah, it is weird how sometimes the things that perform the worst are the things that we're best known for and the things that stick the most. Because, yeah, with 8-Bit Philosophy and like Thug Notes and stuff, like there's more IP, there's more kind of a recognition. But at the end of the day, because of the nature of the business, it's all about views and yeah, like another thing was that we lost our original 8-Bit animator, and we started working with a new 8-Bit animator, and basically, all of Wisecrack, like basically the only thing that we really invest in is writing and research. Like we're basically a company that is really only been able to distinguish it ourselves based on the, hopefully the robustness of our thoughts and like the value of the writing. Because everything else, like we can't really afford to do like super high scale productions and stuff. Like even Thug Notes and Earthling Cinema are literally just one shot. Like
Right.
well, that's why we're able to do 4 to 5. We're able to film 4 to 5 episodes in one day because it's literally just like set up the shot, get through the script, go on.
Yeah, right. Change outfit a little bit or whatever.
Especially with 8-bit, it was definitely straining our production thing. It was the hardest show to
Okay.
write. It was also the hardest show to like make relevant to people's lives and to really like every time that you're making something on YouTube, it's always like a marketing problem. Like how do you get people to click on this? How do you like make it clickbaity? How do you take something that your average YouTuber would never really consider and make it relevant to their lives? And like, how do you do that without maintaining the integrity of the actual philosophy? How do you do it without not just talking about philosophy at all? Like, like if I'm making a show called 8-Bit Philosophy, I want it to be about fucking philosophy, not sociology, not,
Mm.
such and so forth. So yeah, I mean, there were tons of, it was also just like so stressful. That show in particular was just, because there was like a real production element to it. And it was probably the hardest show to research, the hardest show to write. So yeah, it was just a lot of hard work with no return, basically.
Yeah, so Jared, you alluded to in the beginning of talking about all this that your kind of standard, your motto at Wisecrack is to provide this niche where people can think a little bit more deeply than they normally do about some of these cultural issues and cultural products. Do you have a sort of considered philosophy of public philosophy? Have you guys talked about that at Wisecrack as far as how you'd go about engaging with philosophy at this popular cultural level?
Like, I mean, it's not something necessarily like written down. So you're basically saying like, is there a concerted idea of like, okay, so here's how philosophy is spoken about at the academic level, and here's how we're going to talk about it. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so this is going to sound like probably not the most impressive answer, but the true answer to that is I kind of just go by my own gut because I am not educated in philosophy at all. I've never taken a philosophy class in my life. I've, when I was in high school, I've told Austin this before. When I was in high school, I was like super obsessed with The Matrix, and I, grew basically a small passion for philosophy, and then that turned into a passion for cinema studies, and I kind of found myself going between the two. And so when we decided that we had to go outside of literature, go outside Thug Notes, it was like, okay, what's another subject? And I just said, okay, well, because of all the reading that I did when I was obsessed with The Matrix, I feel like I can do philosophy. Like this is something I can figure out. And I just kind of go by my own sense of like, all right, well, I'm a decently smart person. If this sounds novel to me, then chances are your average YouTuber probably hasn't thought about this. So let's just go with that. It's funny, like you wouldn't think, but I think that actually my being a layman is a huge asset to the company. It's like, the kind of the intersection between passion and curiosity, but also the layman aspect is really important because the last thing you want is to have, basically an editor in chief who doesn't know how to talk to the people who don't study philosophy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that you constantly hear about when I just meet people at a bar or something like that, and they ask, what I've studied or what I work in, and if I say philosophy, immediately, I mean, without fail, it's oh my god, I hated philosophy when I was in college, and I'm always like, well,
Yeah.
then first of all, you had a shitty teacher because like I've known plenty of professors that were able to like disseminate the information in a way that was at least appealing to pretty much anybody, and I'd like to think that when I taught university that I did that too. But my student questionnaires were always good at the end, and I've been in Troy's classes before because I like dive bombed one of his classes once, and I sat in it and I saw how engaged the students were, so I know he's got a little bit of that. And I think that we both benefited from that in college too, where we had teachers that were very engaged with us. I mean, we went to a small college, so we didn't have like a lecture hall with 300 people, so maybe that was different where like some TA is just reading bullshit notes. But I mean, philosophy for us was always, yeah, we were inclined towards it, but even in the reception of the information, it was always something that I think we had good environments to allow for that reception of information. So it is important. The medium is the message, right? As McLuhan would say.
Yeah,
The
my
medium
man McLuhan.
matters.
Yeah, when I started 8-Bit Philosophy, I had this idea in my head of what philosophy was, and I learned so much actually diving into these texts, and I was working with this philosophy advisor. Her name is Mia Wood. She's a professor here at a college in Pierce College in Winnetka, and so she was like holding my hand through. I wrote like the first 15 episodes of 8-Bit Philosophy back when I was the only writer, and like she would help me through like word for word to make sure I wasn't fucking it up. And it's weird to say, but like I was like disappointed in philosophy in general. I was like, man, this is a lot less interesting than I thought it would be. A lot of the things, because Mia, like, she's just a philosophy nerd. So like, what was it? She kept on trying to get me to like, so like, for example, like we did a episode on like John Rawls' theory of justice, and like, I don't know, to me, I was just like, man, this sounds like so like slightly bordering, just a tad above Captain Obvious, like this is not going to blow anybody's mind. And I try to blow people's minds. Like that's the whole point. That's how you get
Right.
someone passionate and interested. What was the other one? It was like,
Hold on, real quick. I think we should write this down when we teach John Rawls, or when we talk about John Rawls in the future. What did you say? Just a tick above Captain Obvious?
Slightly above Captain Obvious.
Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, Jesus.
Now, having said that, like obviously I have learned the best part about doing Wisecrack is that it's been the most fulfilling experience of my life. I'm now like, I wouldn't say an expert, but I'm extremely well read in like 120 classic novels, like so many different philosophers and ideas that I've exposed myself to. I mean, it's like getting a graduate degree and making some money instead of spending money. So it's pretty cool.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask is like...
That's cheating, technically, I think.
It is cheating. Yeah, but that's probably the smarter way to do it, right? Rather than take out student loans and shit. No, that's what I was going to ask, though. So like in terms of your personal development, because I think so many people think of philosophy as being... I don't know, dealing with esoteric concepts or with musing, like navel gazing, right? Musing on ideas that aren't really practical. But really, I mean, if you look at it from the ancient Greek perspective, the point was that an unexamined life isn't worth living, because the point is that it betters yourself. It's, as Foucault would say, it's a technology of the self, and taking care of yourself is more important than just simply knowing in the way that we think of knowing yourself. So the invocation to know thyself only makes sense insofar as you take care of yourself, which is a transformation or a work on the self and on the body. So like in terms of your own development, I mean, do you actually think that have you learned a lot because of your informal graduate studies in philosophy and in literature now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my beliefs now are very different than they were a couple of years ago. I mean, my perspective on various things, on life. I mean, the whole mission statement of Wisecrack, at least in its current incarnation with the humanities and philosophy, is very Socratic in that, like, I'm not trying to put forth any ideology. I'm not trying to fight for the left or for the right. I'm literally just trying to say, hey, maybe you haven't thought of this, but what the fuck do I know?
Yeah. So real quick, I have a substantive question, but before I get to the substantive question,
good. Let's fucking get into it.
Are you a communist yet? Is my question. Like from hearing my shit and my musings on Show Me the Meaning, are you #full communism yet, or do I still have to keep working?
No, definitely keep working.
Okay.
I mean, I really don't. The way I say it to myself when I look at myself in the mirror is I say I would never debase myself by adhering to some political ideology.
Yeah, see, this is the thing that I think is interesting, because you said a minute ago, like we're not like shills for the left or for the right, and what that doesn't mean, from what I know about Wisecrack and what I know about you, is that doesn't mean it's like that both sidism that you get in like the snarky, ironic, like Daily Show or like Stephen Colbert, like, well, both sides are equally as absurd. Like that's not really where you guys are at. Like you kind of are like, well, we cover South
think
Park.
Any of those guys even like remotely achieve that? Like if that's their goal, they're failing. Like
they are.
If they're that fuck that. I mean, all those guys that you just mentioned are definitely not appealing to anyone on the right.
No, definitely not. And I think it's interesting because I think what Wisecrack is able to tether is again, this goes back to this idea of like caring for the self. There's something about like, and this actually will tie into my shitty minute, which you didn't get to hear, Jared, but you will hear when the episode comes out. But it's about sort of like advocating for self-destructive behavior, and I mean this in a positive way. but by scrambling your identity and by scrambling your codes and by scrambling the very identities and things that you hold on to and that you cling to so dogmatically. You sort of restrict the possibility for creation and for productivity. And there's something nice about studying philosophy that just bursts that open. I think beyond just trying to be an ideologue and saying like, well, here are my presuppositions. I am an X or I am a Y. It's a dispositional orientation that if you can kind of just have this free-flowing, Deleuze would call it like a rhizome or a line of flight or a nomad. He uses this idea of nomadic thought that he derives from Nietzsche. And it's this idea of being like a nomad in your disposition. And that is sort of like a lovely but terrifying space to be in. But I feel like Wisecrack kind of embodies that. And I think that's almost, when you were talking about it at the beginning, when you were describing it, I feel like that's kind of what you were saying.
Yes. I was actually, when you were saying that, I was like, God damn, Austin knows me well. Yeah, like the way I think about it is like I think of a guy sitting on a chair and like I kind of want to just like kick the chair leg out from under him and then say, like, if the chair is fucking broken, build it the way you want or fix it. Or like if someone is like on crutches or something, I want to kick the crutch off and say, get back up, figure out how you have to do it. Like take the learnings and get back up in your own way. In a sense, I know that sounds horrible, but the other thing is that like one of my earliest philosophical muses was George Carlin, and he would always say that like, look, I'm not an activist. I'm not somebody who's a man of action. I don't get out and do anything. I just sit back and take notes, and that always spoke to me. That's me. I sit back and take notes. I don't have an activist blood cell in my body at all.
Yeah, that reminds me of Zizek in Troy. What is it? More theory, less action?
Yeah, it's the don't do, think.
Yeah.
Which I think that's pretty important in the sense that, you know, pretty much all of us came to philosophy because we were intrigued by ideas. And it's usually the big ideas, right? It's the big questions of the meaning of life, or does God exist, or, you know, those kinds of things.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Yeah, and as much as philosophy today, 95% of it isn't about that stuff anymore. It's about this strange minutia about language and about meaning, but not like the big meaning of life, like purpose, but the meaning of sentences and all this weird stuff. Nobody got into philosophy because they wanted to figure out what sentences do. They got into philosophy because they wanted to think about the big questions.
And that goes to my, like, our most popular videos are about existentialism. And really, like, my initial passion for philosophy was just because I had an existential crisis, and philosophy helped me kind of figure shit out. And yeah, you're right. Like, people enter philosophy because they're inspired by Plato, but not Wittgenstein. No one gives a shit about that. You know, like that's like literally like, you know, there's like 5 people alive who can understand the Tractatus or whatever it is.
Troy's one of them. He had a Wittgenstein day. He actually, the reason that I really fell in love with philosophy, the type that I'm in, is because, and I remind him of this often, but we were in some sort of, we were in like a language class or was it God in philosophy and theology? I don't remember what class we were in, but we were talking afterwards, and the issue of like of like authorial intent came up, and I was talking about like language, and I was thinking like, oh, but it's like, what if it's like the intent of what we're saying is in our thoughts, and then we use words as a medium to communicate the idea, but the truth of the idea is in our thoughts. And I remember Troy, he's like a college sophomore, is like, but what if we think in our language? And I was like, oh shit, like what if that's
I gotta start a podcast with this guy?
Yeah, because then that means that even our thoughts are still kind of stuck within this network of language, and there isn't like some sort of like transcendental ego standing behind operating everything. And I was like, oh fuck. And that was because he was like balls deep in Wittgenstein at the time. So I think, is that right?
Nice.
Yeah, but even with Wittgenstein, dude, the 7th proposition of the Tractatus, right, is saying all the stuff that language can't talk about sensibly is the most important stuff.
Yeah.
And that was like my mystic phase, right?
That's right.
Oh yeah, language can't talk about it. That means it must be super important.
That's right. That's the final line, right? Like wherein
wherein one cannot speak, there one must be silent.
Yeah, there it
but
is.
Then the implication was that's all the good stuff.
I want more of these substantive questions, man. Like, don't hold back.
Well, so here's the interesting thing. So you said the bit about like the crisis with the kicking the chair thing. So the
Yeah.
thing that I think that's interesting is when I was an undergrad, that moment actually is kind of what I trace a lot of this back to. But I had what I call like an epistemological crisis, right? Which is it was a crisis of faith, it was a crisis of thought, it was a crisis of meaning, a crisis of reality. And you were talking about kicking the chair out from underneath. And I remember one of my favorite metaphors is the idea of a ship that's lost at sea. So I know you guys talk a lot about existentialism, nihilism, death of God. You and I have talked about doing like extra stuff on the death of God, like specifically in like a more long
Yeah.
form strategy because of this, because there's an interest there. And I think that my favorite metaphor for kind of basically communicating this is that you're like a ship that's lost at sea. And Nietzsche talks about this. It's like a ship that's lost its mooring, right? You don't have a map anymore, but you're fucking going nevertheless. And you have to create while you're lost at sea. And then while you're out there, you're also on this ship and the ship's falling apart and you have to rebuild the planks of the ship plank by plank. But you don't just destroy the ship and you don't jump on a new ship. You're in your fucking ship. You can't go anywhere or you're going to drown. So you have to just kind of like piece by piece rebuild it perpetually, endlessly. And there's something about that that's terrifying, but I think that's really freeing. So because the videos on Wisecrack are so popular, like in the existential nihilist death of God genre, like why do you think that is? Is that something that appeals more to you as well as to an audience? Do you think that's something that is a sign of the times, that we're like neurotic in this postmodern, post-meta-narrative, post-meaning age? What do you think it is?
Yeah. I mean, I think you just nailed it on the head. I think that it's extremely timely. I think that people are just disillusioned, whether it's with religion or with the systems that promise them things, and I think that, like even when I was in high school, like the whole idea of like these atheistic communities being created on the internet was like a brand new thing. And I just knew it was around the corner where that, once people realize, or not realize, but once people like, the idea of there being no God becomes widespread, then they're going to start slowly understanding, well, what are the ramifications of that? And so, yeah, I just think it's just where people are. I think it's just, yeah. Sorry, I can't come up with anything more profound to say.
What do you think are some of the ramifications of there not being a God, if that is the case?
Talk about substantive questions.
I mean,
Yeah.
shit, yeah, fuck. Well, I mean, can I just, I mean, this podcast has the sticky leaves section, so if I may
Yes.
quote Ivan Fyodorovich from the same book, he says that if there is no God, then everything goes.
Mm.
Which then Woody Allen says again in Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, like, I think that, so it's funny. Not only I was a little disappointed that I don't get to be on Sticky Leaves, because I recently reread The Grand Inquisitor, and it's in that chapter where Alyosha says that, and I was reading it. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is from the fucking podcast, and so I told you, Austin, that when I was at Georgetown. I just spoke at Georgetown, and they wanted me to talk about a movie, so I talked about The Dark Knight. And you and I have talked extensively about the Dark Knight trilogy before, and I used it as a lens to talk about the death of God and what it means to live in a post-God world. And one of the reasons why The Dark Knight is one of my favorite movies, and I think that perhaps, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think one of the things that perhaps you and I differ on is that I just, and this is going back to the Grand Inquisitor, which is, I think, probably the text that probably most encapsulates my beliefs, and that is that mankind is not noble enough to live with the freedom that is allotted after God is dead, and therefore we should weekend at Bernie's it like the Grand Inquisitor does. and just like puppeteer this motherfucker so that people will think there is one.
That's interesting. So you like the idea of a sort of, you like the idea of living in the wake.
Just how you say that Zizek is a misanthrope, I'm a misanthrope. Like, I have very little faith in humanity.
Yeah. I think the difference is that so Zizek would be much more inclined to, like, maybe we could use this term, tarry with the negative, or the idea that he enjoys the idea of lack, right? And because he gets a lot of this from Hegel and from Lacan and stuff like that. Whereas I am both Lacanian and influenced by Hegel and influenced by the existentialist tradition, but at the same time I'm also really influenced by Deleuze. And so Deleuze's big difference with the Hegelian tradition is precisely on this notion of lack. And for Deleuze, what you have is pure excess. You have abundance. You have immanence that is immanent to itself rather than a sort of like immanence that is derived from its relation to some sort of transcendence or some sort of Urgrund, which is like the void or something like that, right? So for Deleuze, the idea of lack or the negative is something that he has a problem with. And so for me, I think there's something different maybe in the orientation in those two schools of thought. Because for Deleuze, it would be like then just radical creation and radical production would be the response to the death of God. So he's heavily influenced by Nietzsche, and I think that really that like post-structuralist and postmodern philosophy is wrestling seriously with the death of God and taking it seriously and believing it and saying, okay, well then what the fuck do we do now? And so some of it just stops with like postmodern cynicism, and then some of it goes into like what we could call like a postmodern production maybe. And I think that's kind of more my thing, is it's more like, listen, I don't have faith in what humanity is either, but then again, I don't necessarily think that humanity is anything. I think that we're always perpetually creating the idea of the human. So I'm more inclined towards like a post-human potential for recreating what the human could become at some point in the future. And we're
and
still
is that idea like linked to a lot of like cyborg shit, like, you know, like augmenting humanity with like
growing your fingernails out to 2 feet each.
or just like I don't know, like I mean shit, I don't know what you're gonna have to do to humans to make them more noble creatures. It's gonna have to be some sort of technology.
But I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by noble, because to say noble, a noble implies that there's a standard by which we're actually measuring it. And I actually think that there is no such thing as nobility, except that we then could redefine what we want to be as noble, right? So I would even take it more radical.
Okay.
Because even to say like we're not noble, but maybe we could one day be noble, that's still standing in the shadow or the echo of the death of God, and still kind of denying, like Nietzsche's Madman says, that like he's come too early, right? Nietzsche comes into the market and he says, God is dead, we've killed him. But what people often forget is the last thing that happens. The madman walks away dejected, like, man, I've come too soon. They're not ready to hear it yet. And that's the productive moment that's in Nietzsche. It's
maybe you just put the words in my mouth in a better way that I can. I think that if the madman said people aren't ready to hear it yet, I think people are ready to hear it now. Or at least they relish in it in some perverse way. And like, you know, things like Rick and Morty are, you know, like making the are like conveying the madman's message in a way that is resonating with mass audiences, and they're kind of getting it.
Yeah, I was at a bar the other night talking with a dude, and we were chatting about ideas, and immediately, you know what he said to me? He's like, wait, like your ideas, is this like BoJack Horseman? And I said, fucking A, dude. I said, fucking A, it is. I said, in fact, I work for this company that has a video exactly on this. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, one issue with that, though, is, you know, Nietzsche himself even has this difference or this distinction between active and passive nihilism, right? Which is, you can respond to this death of God in 2 different ways. One is the heroic creation of values, the active nihilist. But the other is the last man, right? The passive nihilist who just responds by resigning himself to nihilism and focusing only on satisfying pleasure and you know, nothing else. So there's also that crossroads where acknowledging the death of God and nihilism and all that does not automatically mean salvation lies in automatic creation of values, as if that's like a natural state of mankind, right? So you still have to stoke each other towards that creation of values, and it's not going to happen easily or automatically.
Yeah, no, the growing pains are real, and I think that they're perpetual. I actually, and this would be like more of a long-term theory that one day I'd like to develop, but I actually think that language and reflective consciousness essentially betrays our ability to really embrace a full sort of active nihilism without the specter of God kind of coming back. And I think that it's because linguistic consciousness essentially is about control, essentially leads towards these ideas of a godding. And what I mean by that is a sort of like a creation of identities or a creation of fixed transcendent ideas. And so I think that there's this perpetual battle that if there is such a thing as a human nature, that maybe this is the human nature. It's not a linear temporal, like God used to exist and now historically God doesn't exist, but it's this perpetual tension that always exists in the now, where the present and the past and the future are always contracted at a given moment, and they all sort of express different connections or attachments to this idea of God or the death of God, and that creates a tension that is inherently human. And so will there ever be a time when humans reach like this utopic state, this cyborg future where we've become this whatever we call noble in the future, and we can therefore embrace our pure radical freedom? I don't think so, as long as we're speaking beings. I think that might be the curse of the human.
We yearn for freedom, but freedom hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is Kierkegaard, right? The idea of anxiety as being prior to original sin. You know, it's that even all these other things that we're talking about are second order, but that anxiety of human existence itself in the light of our freedom is essentially traumatic.
Right. Yeah, and you have to tarry with that. I mean, you were saying a minute ago, Jared, that the Grand Inquisitor's lesson is that it's not as easy as just accepting freedom. People maybe can't take that, and maybe you end up destroying society by introducing that level of freedom.
Yeah.
But the alternative is also terrible, right? Some form of enslavement.
Right. I mean, the Inquisitor, it takes place in the Inquisition for a good reason. He's not exactly doing great things in the name of, creating whatever. Like he's doing the devil's work. He's giving into Christ's third temptation by creating the kingdom on earth that usurps God or something like that. Basically, the Catholic Church or whatever. And so obviously he's torturing people and doing horrendous things, all in the name of maintaining faith for the happiness of the masses. I mean, of course, I would never say that we should all forgive give our free will and to the feet of the church and just do what they tell us, so that I think the words are that humankind can be a incontestable happy anthill. But I think that there's good wisdom in that.
Yeah, it's important to note also that chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, comes right after, I think, the chapter where Alyosha and Ivan discuss basically the problem of evil and go through a litany of terrible atrocities that human beings have committed against one another. And I mean, it's not like Dostoevsky's just saying we need to have a transcendent other who can give us meaning for our lives, otherwise we're going to end up like this. I mean, the alternative is not pretty either.
Yeah, and so I've read the book like 3 times, and the first 2 times I read it, the ensuing chapter, the homilies of Father Zosima, which are like, I guess, kind of the counter argument. The first 2 times I read it, I thought, oh man, this is just a bunch of religious bullshitty mumbo jumbo. Can't possibly contend with the cold hard logic of Ivan's poem. But after having done Wisecrack and having kind of opened up my own perspective quite a bit, I reread that chapter and it really touched me. And just in general, I think, I kind of came into Wisecrack as kind of, I was young. We started it when I was 24, 25. And I was definitely kind of more in the Reddit atheist persona. And then actually when I was writing, I think the 8th episode of 8-Bit Philosophy, which was an episode on Kierkegaard, that was a huge paradigm shift for me, learning about the leap of faith. And, that was just one of many really important developments in my life that I probably would have never gone through if I didn't, do this project.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I think we also need to be really clear what we mean by the death of God. Because when I speak of the death of God, I don't mean the death of the monotheistic God that used to exist, like capital G God. Sure, I think that's kind of what Nietzsche was saying, but I think it's much more profound than that. I think it's much more about the death of identity, the death of singular fixed ideas, the death of the narratives that we tell ourselves to give ourselves identity or to give us comfort at night. And you find this obviously in the postmodern criticisms of Jean-François Lyotard, who says that postmodernity is incredulity towards meta-narrative, right? It's this disbelief of these self-legitimizing stories of Western progress, or even communism is viewed as a meta-narrative, right? This idea that, there's this cycle, this linear cycle of history, that we're going to get to this next phase, if you will, of history. And these stories, whether they be the religious story or a political story or a cultural story or even a personal story that you tell yourself, I just tweeted out the other day when something, I was being a bit snarky, but you see this constantly with people who are like, I'm just so weird, man. Like, I'm weird. Do you want to be weird with me? And it's like a thing to say, but it's like, no, you're not weird. You just feel uncomfortable and you don't have your place in the world. And then you're using this idea that's an external idea that other people proliferate and you appropriate it to give yourself a sense of meaning and give yourself an identity, which is fine. That's fine. Do that. You're a human. That's what humans do. We are myth creators, but let's be aware of the fact that we're creating myths for ourselves and that this is part and parcel of being human, I think. And so the question of the death of God, for me, most stridently, is the sort of transformation or the perpetual contestation of those myths that we tell ourselves, wherever we find them, however big they might be, whether it's God with a capital G or communism or capitalism or whatever ism, or whether it's my mom is a beautiful person because she was this type of person, and you just like boil her down to a singular identity, and then you realize, oh fuck, well, she's just a human and she gets pissed off like everybody else, or whatever. It's any sort of contestation of any fixed identity for me, and I think that's even more profound and more traumatic. But I also think it kind of takes us out of just like the Reddit version or like the Dawkins version of atheism, where it's like it's just all about moving towards another ideology, which is science, which then becomes a new myth, or materialism, which becomes a new myth, or I'm going to go into conspiracy theories, which is just another new myth. And it's about the perpetual contestation of myth making while we make new myths that then in turn need to be contested so that we can make new myths, which need to be contested endlessly.
It's funny you mentioned Dawkins. I've always been asking myself, like, has he never engaged with philosophy? Like, does he just think there's no use for it? Like, what is this guy's deal?
I mean, he just talks mad shit about it. Literally, he
Okay.
says that he says philosophy is useless. He mocks it all the time on Twitter. Mocks it in his books, in debates and stuff like that. He thinks that philosophy is pointless. He thinks that unless something is empirically verifiable, then it's gonna be at the very best like a second order discipline.
Right. But even him saying that is philosophy.
You can't tell him that. He doesn't understand hermeneutics, man.
Yeah, he's basically repeating all the same arguments the logical positivists had in the 20s,
Right.
and forgetting that no one accepts those anymore because they're internally self-refuting.
Right.
Yeah, I Dawkins was a pretty big central figure on the internet. He doesn't seem as relevant anymore. I mean, he's not as relevant as like some of the other internet intellectuals, but
Well, now it's turned into like Sam Harris probably is the guy that's taken his place, right?
right.
So, and
I
then
don't really
now
know much about him, but yeah, I mean, the internet intellectual landscape is a weird spot.
Well, Harris was one of the horsemen they called themselves of like the atheist apocalypse, right? It was Dawkins, Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Dan Dennett. Yeah, and those were the four dudes. But now, interestingly enough, with the rise of someone like a Jordan Peterson, I feel like people are bored of this new atheist thing. So even someone like Sam Harris doesn't talk so much about atheism in the same context. Now it's much more about this. He would call it like maybe a positive or constructive idea of things. I don't necessarily think it is, but now it's about like defending free speech and being like an advocate for something and protecting certain liberal rights or something along those lines. And so it's almost like the cultural zeitgeist, if you will, has shifted from the sexy days of new atheism to now it's like defending the liberal rights of Western capitalist democracy, which you get in like Jordan. What did they call it? The intellectual dark web is what it was termed by Barry Weiss, right, in that article. And that
Yeah,
now
I
is
mean, I
kind
think
of
you can
taken
see
over.
like even a bit of reversion going. Like, I mean, Austin and I know this woman named Carrie who sometimes contributes to the podcast, and Jordan Peterson has given her. She grew up Baptist, then was atheist through all of her college education and her initial professional life, and I think she read Peterson, and now she's reading more and more religion. And I don't know her well enough to say if she's a religious person now, but I can definitely see voices like him, propelling some kind of a reversion.
Yeah. I mean, she did say that because we talked about it when we had a chat once about Jordan Peterson being a gateway drug to religion, that a lot of people that read Jordan Peterson, they then get like into like, because she mentioned a guy named Tim Keller, who is a pastor that, Troy, I don't know how long it's been since you've heard that name, but
Been a while.
yeah. But Tim Keller was like a big figure in the kind of like not quite emerging church, but sort of like if you're not an asshole Calvinist, then like Tim Keller was like Calvinism light, like because he still wants to take care of the poor, and he still had like a church that was kind of relatively hip, But so a lot of people are going from like Jordan Peterson to Tim Keller, and then they're like coming back into the doors of the church. And there's something really interesting about this because, the new atheist movement was all about like completely dismantling the authority of religion and then trying to like uphold the virtues of logical positivism via like a scientific view of the world. Whereas this like new shift is more like you were just saying, there is this reversion to like a sort of bringing God or bringing religion, or in Peterson's case, bringing like the universal abstract notions of myth that sort of supposedly define or give an understanding to the human experience, and kind of bringing them in the back door. Well, sometimes it's the back door and sometimes it's quite deliberate. But it's really interesting because I feel like, they might be in the wake of the death of God, but they're so scared still of the freedom that comes in the wake or the echo of the death of God that they're not willing to actually be the active nihilists. So they feel nihilism, and so what they do is they become reactionary, and they have to create new gods or new identities, and they cling so tightly to those new myths. Rather than what I would advocate is I think that it's okay to still press further into the destruction of our myths. And not that it's bad or good, because even the new creation of myths is not great. It's just that what kind of myths are we creating, And that's where the real issue is. It's not that myth making per se is bad. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of abstract.
No, it's not. I mean, I can't help but, I mean, it probably is, and I'm probably understanding it on probably a bit of a surface level, but I think this kind of just goes back to the Inquisitor. I mean, the Inquisitor is saying that we need to maintain the meta narratives that worked to make sense of the world, and the destruction of them will create this freedom that people can't handle because they can't handle being an active nihilist, like you said. This is not exactly what the Inquisitor says, but I'm kind of just using it as an extension of these ideas. And I guess I don't really know specifically what you mean in terms of like, continuing to dismantle these meta narratives and just kind of see what happens. I mean, I guess I'm down for that. But I also see how if people are seeing what's happening and they're unhappy with it, and I also see the value of kind of, looking at what's happening and saying like, no, like, there are myths, there are narratives, there are meta narratives that create meaning in our lives, and we need meaning. And this other path that we're going down, it may yield something, but it's never going to be meaning. And if meaning is what I need, then I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't see it as like a reversion, like regressive necessarily, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as we're social beings, and if you kick the chair out from under us, to use the metaphor you were using earlier, Jared, then people are going to use whatever's available to them to build that chair up again, because they're not just going to sit on the floor. They can't bear sitting on the floor.
Right.
And some people are just going to build the exact same chair because that's all they know.
Right.
And that's okay, because if they can't make anything else, I would much rather them have that chair than, not have anything, because then if they're standing for too long, then they might get violent, because who likes standing for too long?
But what if the chair that they rebuild is a chair that was rebuilt under conditions that we might call, and I'm not using this term to say that Jordan Peterson is a fascist, so don't at me. But what if someone rebuilds the chair and it's the fascist chair because they don't want to stand anymore? So Zizek uses the distinction between the hysteric and the obsessive, right? And I know that I've talked about it with both of you guys. You've heard this, but so the hysteric is the one who is at least honest in acknowledging a trauma, but maybe responds in a way symptomatically that isn't what we would say true, right? They act in a hysterical or a psychotic or neurotic manner or whatever. Whereas the obsessive is the one who doesn't even acknowledge the truth of the trauma, but is controlling the situation. And so Zizek kind of would liken this to describing Nazism is obsessive rather than traumatic, because it doesn't actually deal with the truth of the traumatic experience, which is socioeconomic crises or the flux of being or whatever the fuck you want to talk about it. But rather what they did is they said that they had to like purge from within them those things that were impure. So you got to blame it on the other in our midst. It's the Jews, or it's the non-neurotypical, or it's the gays, or whatever, right? So you have to purge the impurities from your midst in order to control. And so there's an obsessive, that's what the obsessive is. There's like a logic that kind of ties together with fascistic ideas or fascistic thinking, that fascism in one sense is an obsessive logic. So what if someone rebuilds the chair with that type of logic? I mean, we need to have the tools to be able to criticize that or resist that or prevent that or to perpetually or at least to not justify it and say, hey, fuck, well, at least they need something because they don't want to be standing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but I don't know if, at least I can't come up with a perfect example of how that chair would be built and keep someone from being violent, which I think, is probably the worst scenario that we'd like to avoid. Um, I mean, look, I don't have the perfect utopic answer. I don't think anyone
Yeah.
does.
No. Yeah. No. I mean, all this to say, I mean, this is not easy shit.
Right.
And I think in one sense, one of the things that actually betrays our philosophical musings, whether it's at the highest of academic levels or at like you're just chilling with your friends and you're talking about whether or not you think that such and such is a good idea or a bad idea. I mean, that's still philosophical musings, right? That's the basis of ethics. I think that we were caught up, and I think this is one of the maybe the holdovers of the specter of Christianity that betrays our thinking, and not just Christianity, but Judeo-Christian thinking, because it's the sort of monotheistic promise for some sort of final end goal or some sort of heaven. And I think that when we think about things so often, it's like we're thinking about them under the rubric of the assumption that there needs to be some sort of final or utopic end, right? So like so many times when I talk with people and they're like, oh, but what do you think? Like, do you think that a sort of a Marxian idea is going to lead to the permanent utopia? And I'm like, no, man, not at all. Like for me, Marxism is about a disposition of criticism towards capitalism, towards asymmetry of power, wherever you find it. Like that's what it is. I'm not interested in like the teleology of things where it's like this leads to utopia, or this leads to heaven. And I think that sometimes we think so much still under the rubric, we're still betrayed that even when we think like politically, like, are we going to vote for a Democrat, or are we going to vote for the Republican, or are we going to vote for the Green Party? Who are we going to vote for? And a lot of times we're still fighting for heaven. And I think that kind of betrays our ability to actually, to really create freely and rebuild the chair in a way that wouldn't lead towards these less than desirable outcomes.
Yeah, and to circle back around to what we were talking about in the beginning, this is the value of public philosophy, right? In that when someone's in a crisis, they have a tendency to use whatever makes them feel safe and gives them a community identity, so they don't have to experience that crisis anymore when they're rebuilding their epistemic web. And public philosophy puts those tools out there so that you don't have to do that in such a way that you're abusive towards others or even abusive towards yourself, right, in ways that are involve intellectual self-harm. So public philosophy can put those tools out there and help you develop ideas that are considered and that's, have logical rigor to them and have considered many sides objectively and dispassionately. And those are all important tools for making sure that we can tarry with those opposites and with the notion that we're never going to have that perfect utopic sort of end goal and be okay with it.
Yeah. Like we're in a boat, we're rebuilding the boat, and we don't have a map, and there's also no islands. But fuck it. We're already at sea. So you got to keep fucking going and rebuilding. And maybe we'll run into other boats while we're out there, and this is my metaphor for social life. Is it working? And then we'll see other humans and be like, "Hey, do you want to get lost with me?"
And your vision, Austin, is one of these boats a sex boat?
Oh, my boat is the sex boat. That's it. sex and weed. What was the old bumper sticker that they used to have in the 70s? Booze, ass, or grass. No one rides for free. Or wait, what is it? Oh no, ass. Something like that. I don't remember. Yeah, I do like that. I think that a little bit of hedonism is good in the pursuit of like self-deconstruction.
Was what William Blake said, the road to excess leads to the palace of wisdom.
See, that's beautiful. See, I like that.
Yeah.
That's the most awesome thing I've ever heard.
I used to tell myself that all the time in college when I would listen to The Doors and smoke weed, and I was like, dude, I'm fucking gaining knowledge, bro.
Jesus, man. See, we're laughing about this because we realize how kind of silly it was because we all probably had that. And shit, I still have that sometimes, right? But sometimes we also need to just like lighten up and realize that as humans, it's okay to fuck up, you know? And that actually it's a good thing.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I fucked up many times.
yeah, and
I'm great at it.
we're fucking great at it, but we don't create social systems, at least not right now. Especially, it seems like that allow for forgiveness and for patience and for growth very often. And I know historically we haven't either. I mean, fuck, someone fucks up, they would just like cut their head off or cut their hand off, or they'd be ostracized from the community. But maybe we can do better with allowing for these growing pains of that come along with self-examination and self-creation and trying to figure out what boats we're going to steer or what chairs we're going to build or whatever metaphor we want to use. But it takes a lot of patience, and we also, I think we just got to be patient with people, and that doesn't mean like you justify aberrant behavior where people are harming other people, but at the same time, man, growing pains are okay and they're good.
So Austin, are you? You know, I think it was your last podcast. You talked about like the LA scene and not being able to live like the LA life, man.
Mm.
Dude, I sometimes wonder, like, you know, especially like Alec, you know, some of the people that we work with, who I all love, by the way, who are, you know, firmly on the left, like you and Alec and Lux. I'm like, would these guys really would they feel this way if they had to live in LA like I do? You know, because it's like it's hard. There's something particularly disgusting going on in Hollywood, and that is that, like, and I think this happens in all, probably in all industries and in all probably communities, is that there is this kind of panoptic, uh, uh, like you are compelled to hold a certain ideological belief, or else you're not getting a job in Hollywood, straight up, you
Yeah.
know, and I find that pretty gross because nothing scares me more than when ideology becomes fashion. And, you know, like, just like if you're looking for a job, you know, you go and you wear a suit to the interview. People are doing that with ideology, and here in Hollywood it's very far left ideology, and a lot of these people are not very smart, and the things that they do and say to, you know, basically to wear that ideology and make sure that everybody knows that they're wearing it loudly and proudly, because this is a cutthroat business and people will do anything to get a leg up, including, you know, just you know, let somebody dictate their beliefs or let a system dictate their beliefs. And that scares the fucking shit out of me. And that's the reason
Yeah.
why, I mean, you could say I'm so reactionary toward a lot of left wing thinking, because the way I see it manifest itself around me is frightening.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, what it does is it actually bums me out that because I come out of this evangelical background, and I, you know, Troy and I have talked about this too. Is I always jokingly say, well, I don't know how joking I am actually. I want to write a book about like Marxist apologetics. Apologetics is the practice of defending the faith of any sort of faith, but in Christianity, it's a big business, let's say. But apologetics it's like philosophy mixed with theology, mixed with parlor games to try to get people to embrace the Christian faith, right? And I say that relatively snarkily. I mean, there's some good faith people and some good faith approaches, but one of the things that I thought was the people that I was always attracted to within Christian apologetics were the ones who would try to say, listen, if we want people to really embrace this message that we think is beautiful, like if we really think that Jesus is the Lord of creation, the most beautiful thing, the summum bonum, the greatest good, if we really think that's the case, then we need to present that in the most winsome way possible to just kind of get out of the way and let the beauty shine. Like, it's not our job to convince them, but let's just let the beauty of the truth of the thing shine. And I kind of feel similarly inclined towards my approach to politics, or even towards really anything, is that if I really think that my ideas are beautiful, if I really think that that a leftist vision, however we define that, do I really think that a sort of death of God, active nihilism is a beautiful thing, then how can I create a winsome approach that would win people to that side because the idea is beautiful, not because I've manipulated them or I've pressured them or I've forced them or I've used some sort of tactic, but that rather I've just kind of pointed to the beauty of the sun, but I've gotten myself out of the way, right? Or I've been a conduit that has allowed the beauty to shine through me. And I know that that's sort of very kind of Christian-y, evangelical kind of language, and I think there's something good about that. And I think that you're right that when you don't see that, what you see in LA is you see a sort of a prism, or a set of prisms that kind of turns you off and makes you think, well, fuck, man, if that's what it means to be a left or a liberal, then a lefty or a liberal, then I don't know if I want to be a part of that, because you're kind of an asshole. You're shutting down anybody else's debate. You're not letting people think. You are all like mindless drones saying the same shit. You're all eating the same foods and doing the same things and, exhibiting the same habits. I can see how that would be a turnoff.
Yeah, man.
But this,
I mean, what you just described, you got to get on it, because it's people like, I mean, no one in particular, but like it's this LA kind of thing, and like this stifling feeling that leads to a starvation for certain opinions that do not come to the fore, that leads to someone like Jordan Peterson being the most famous intellectual alive.
Right.
And one more thing I want to say, like, I don't want to give off the belief that like, oh, everyone else has these outside pressures that dictates their ideology and I'm immune. I actually think that I'm not immune. I think that in the same way that people in LA who are trying to make it in the industry are, probably going to be more left-leaning because they're a product of your environment. And the same way that, look, I don't want to condemn you two, but you guys are part of the academic establishment. Perhaps that has a lot. I mean, you guys have to please teachers. You have to write in ways that they approve. Perhaps that's something too. But I am similar, but it's more toward the right. The YouTube, I have to fucking survive on this platform. I have to fucking make money so I can pay Austin, so we can pay our rent, so I can live. And YouTube is dominated by the right. In the same way that these, people who want a job in Hollywood have to, become leftists, I am no different. I have to understand where people on the right or in the center right or where these intellectual dark web, it behooves me to find out where these people are coming from. And, I think anytime you go down a rabbit hole like that, you're going to start saying, oh, okay, I see things from this person's perspective, which I don't think is a bad thing, whether you're on the left or the right. But I've just
not at all. No, I mean, Corey Robin writes about this a lot. He's a sort of left-wing cultural theorist, writer. I think he's actually a political theorist. I don't know is he an academic, Troy?
I think it's poli-sci.
Poli-sci, yeah. And he wrote a book called The Reactionary Mind that is about the sort of history of conservatism. So he goes back to like Burke, and he basically argues that that conservatism is neo-reactionary or counter-revolutionary. So people think of it as not being revolutionary at all, but just trying to preserve. And he says, no, actually, it has a sort of revolutionary impetus, but it's counter-revolutionary to the revolution, But one of the things that he tries to really do is he wants to stress that people on the right, and he's writing to the audience on the left primarily, he wants to say, listen, they're not just crazy ideologues. They have sincere ideas. They're not just simply in bad faith. Just because you disagree with them doesn't mean it's bad faith. Doesn't mean that they're ideological in some sort of blind or rigid sense. And so he wants people to realize that, fuck, there are reasons why people believe things. And it's important to listen, to understand, where is this person coming from? What are this person's anxieties? What are this person's fears? Are you afraid of standing, if we're going to use the chair metaphor? Are you afraid of sitting on the floor? Are you afraid? Did someone kick the chair out from underneath you? And so no, you've just been grasping at any sort of myth to give yourself identity so that you can have meaning, so you can wake up and get out of your fucking bed in the morning. And if that's the case, then that impulse to give yourself meaning so you can drag yourself out of the bed, so you don't just wallow in despair, maybe that impulse isn't bad, but maybe they just need different tools. Or maybe we can develop different tools by which we can rebuild better chairs together in a context that wouldn't be that wouldn't lead to like fascism, or that wouldn't lead to a racism, or that wouldn't lead to the perpetuation of some sort of dominating power structure that creates asymmetries or economic inequality or whatever. And I think that understanding that impulse and really having a sensitivity towards people is extremely important. And I think we have to just respect that people they're not monsters, And it's really easy to turn them into monsters.
I mean, one of the reasons I love working with you so much, Austin, is because I know that you went through many changes in your life, and because, now you are in very much leftist circles, but you have an evangelical background. You grew up in Orange County. It's very like me, who grew up in Houston, Texas, very conservative, and now I live in LA, and I grew up in Austin. So I mean, I know that there are human beings on both sides, and I know that that sounds a little bit they're like reductive, but I really don't think a lot of people really believe that.
Oh,
I
I
really
agree.
the thing that scares me the most is when people think that they're right, and
Mm.
I know a lot of people who think that they're right, and that's frightening.
Yeah, I like that we have this analogy going with Christian or religious apologetics because, Jared, you mentioned a minute ago the idea of ideology as fashion. And, the scary thing about fashion or etiquette is that etiquette has no reason behind it.
Yes,
It's just brute force. So like, why do you show up to a certain place and wear a particular set of clothes? Well, because you have to. There's
right.
no reason for it, and it's when you have no reason for it that it seems like it's the least sinister, but it's the most sinister for that reason because brute force backs it up, and then you end up with this battle between forces, which is not at all in consideration of people being human beings who can think for themselves and have reasons for their beliefs and all these things that make us human and are the best part of being a human intellectually.
Mm.
So yeah, I think this ideology as etiquette thing is really one of the most sinister um, parts of sort of 21st century intellectual life on both sides, but it
Yeah,
seems to be even more so on the left.
and it's super scary in Hollywood simply because like there's no place where people are more ruthless than Hollywood, because as Austin I'm sure knows, everyone has moved here from their small town, and they've told everyone that they've ever loved, everyone that they've ever like had been friends with, that they were going to move there and achieve their dreams. And if it's just, if throwing somebody under the bus, or making an ideological spectacle, or starting some sort of a controversy, is if they think that that could even give them the smallest step up the ladder, they're gonna fucking do it.
Oh yeah. That's why when the dating scene, the fucking, even just the friend scene, I don't care if it's meeting a homie at CrossFit, you don't know if this person is actually authentic and genuine, or are they just trying to somehow gain some sort of advantage, that you're just some sort of commodity to help them build up more human capital so that they can,
Yeah.
meet the next
The re-
producer or the writer or whatever. It's tough,
one
man, to navigate
yeah.
that minefield.
One of the reasons I'm so paranoid is because my roommate, who I love to death, is part of the UCB community, and we have very thin walls, and I overhear so much gossip, and every day I'm just like, oh my god, thank God I am not a part. It's weird. It's actually really fucked up. Like when I was a kid, I used to think to myself, oh man, like, and this is back in my day where I would perhaps consider myself like more of a Marxist. I was like, man, I really wish I had a sense of community in my life.
Mm.
Like I never really had that. I felt very alienated. I felt like, no one in my community like ever had my back, or that like, I could really be myself and be unashamed to express myself around other people. But now I'm in this stage in my life where like I look at communities and I'm like, thank God I don't have to be a part of that. But you know what I'm saying? Because I would just have to sell my soul, or just have to be
Yeah.
inauthentic all the time. Especially like if you're in a
Yeah.
and a lot of this is very Hollywood centric, because this is like what I'm saturated in. I don't leave LA nearly enough. But like UCB, like, oh my God, like there is a set of guidelines, that you have to believe A, B, C, D. You have to, like, first of all, I wouldn't want to be a part of that. But second of all, like, there's all this drama that you have to like circumnavigate, and like,
Yeah.
and
Well, and you have
that's
to
something
invest, and you
very
have to
fucked up
invest in
to
it.
think about how I'm now glad to not be part of a community, because it would be too stifling and too dangerous. That's very disturbing now that I'm saying it out loud.
No, no. So Sartre makes this distinction in his Critique of Dialectical Reason between what he calls a group or a group infusion, and then he uses the word an organization or an organized group, and then what we might call a collective. And so the collective is the group ensemble. I don't want to say group because that confuses the terms. It's a practical ensemble is what he calls it. So a collective is a practical ensemble. A group is another type of practical ensemble. And the collective is the practical ensemble that is united and that is conditioned by what he calls a serial logic. And the serial logic is defined in a couple of ways, but simply said, it's where the individual participants or the members within the collective are replaceable. They don't really matter in relation to the collective object. So the collective object would be UCB, right? Which is Upright Citizens
Mm-hmm.
Brigade for people who aren't familiar. It's a comedy, improv comedy group and school, and they do performances and stuff like that. And a lot of famous people have come out of it because they have like a pretty rigid training program. But anyway, it's become like a church culty kind of thing among certain alt community people. We have a writer for Wisecrack who's a buddy who actually used to be on the show and used to do the This Week in Hip Hop, and hopefully we'll get him back. But Michael, who was a part of a rival group in LA called IO, which recently shut down. But the idea was, Michael is critical of UCB because of this very same thing, because of like the group think, right? And so that's the collective object that mediates the social relations of the collective. It's what gives people meaning in relation to one another that are a part of UCB. And what comes along with that are all the attendant pressures, social expectations, the gossipy things that you have to give a fuck about, the rules for how you do comedy, all of those things, the ways that you are auditioning, the parties that you go to, all of those things are conditioned and mediated by this collective object. But the individual component parts themselves, the individual members, they have an inessential status because they're replaceable. You can just put somebody else in that slot, right? So there's this characteristic of fungibility that comes to define the social relations within the group. And then on top of that, there's a competition because there are limited spaces also within the collective, and Sartre talks about this. So there's a competition, there's an exchangeability, and then because of that, there's an alterity, there's an otherness, there's a way that we treat other people as being sort of like other than me, because they are either going to steal my seat, or they're going to steal my place, or they're going to hear the gossip and I'm not going to hear the gossip. And so it creates an anxiety as well that conditions that. Whereas the group is a different type of practical ensemble. It's one where those relations of competition, of exchangeability, and of otherness or alterity are dissolved and eradicated in sort of what he calls mediated reciprocity. And it's the idea that you have a common goal and you suspend those individual projects that lead to competition and alienation or otherness and exchangeability, but that rather you kind of all work towards a common goal. And the question is does that model, the group model that I just mentioned, that isn't characterized by the serial collective model, is that something that can last? Is that something that you can perpetuate endlessly, or do you inevitably fall into those collective type of ensembles? And there's a problem in his theory, but nevertheless, this is something that he's exploring. And I think that the community that you described, that you are like reacting to, is the collective, and I get that it's the sort of collective model or the collective logic. But maybe there's a way to have a group logic that that wouldn't be conditioned by that type of groupthink or alienation or competition or exchangeability.
Yeah. So, moral of the story: if you get me out of LA, maybe I'll become a communist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And chatting.
I hope I was able to keep up with you brainiacs.
Hey, I have one last question for you, Jared.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked in a mirror and said the phrase "in a world"?
Oh, like, you mean like the trailer voice?
Yeah, because like, when did you realize you had the ideal like voiceover voice?
Oh man, I'm so happy you said that. You know, when I was in high school, uh, I was part of the history club, and I was a very weird kind of kid in which like I hung out with all like the stoner soccer kids, but I was also like honor roll top of my class. And so like I was either like hanging out with like all the nerdy kids or hanging out with like the degenerates. And so, like my work ethic was like, all right, I want to do the least amount of work possible. Long story short, as part of the history club, they only invited me into the club so that I could do the voiceover for their documentary. And, like we went to state and we got all these awards, and I didn't do jack shit except read a script. And that was, I guess, honestly, I never wanted to perform anything like that. I wanted to make shows. I wanted to make 8-bits. I wanted to make Thug Notes. I wanted to make Earthling Cinema. But once again, just like just like Hollywood dictates what people do and write and say and believe, the platform of YouTube dictates what I do, say, and believe, whether I like it or not. And part of that is like, okay, well, they want authenticity, they want a personality, they want, the curtain unveiled. So I just started hosting videos, and it was not something I ever planned on doing, but here we are.
That's a good lesson for the rest of us. Then
What's the lesson?
you're condemned to your talents.
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah. I mean, like once again, I came out here wanting to be like a director and a filmmaker, but I just knew that I was probably better at, just doing philosophy and literature and stuff because I was just good at that. So yeah, you kind of just gotta, especially if you want to make it in this town, you gotta just, if you have any gifts, for the love of God, pursue those.
Mhm.
Don't try to
Yeah.
work against your skill set.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you if they're not familiar? I mean,
You
if
can
you don't
hit me
subscribe
up.
to Wisecrack, fucking subscribe to Wisecrack, people.
Yes,
Come
please
on.
do. Austin's got a new video coming out that actually Michael is writing. I just spoke to him this morning about it. He's going to be doing the
Sweet.
Bo Burnham thing. So hit me up at Wisecrack on Twitter, Father of Woody on Instagram, because you can see pictures of my dog and my girlfriend's dog. And yeah, Wisecrack on YouTube. Check out. I'm sure all of you listen to Show Me the Meaning, the podcast that Austin co-hosts with me. So definitely check that out. We're doing Deadpool tomorrow. I don't want to hear what you thought about it yet, Austin. I don't want spoilers for tomorrow, but we're doing Deadpool 2.
I'm seeing it in 6 hours. I'm seeing it in
Oh,
6 hours.
okay.
So,
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So in 6 hours, I will be seeing this film. So I'm curious. I liked the first one a lot, and
Oh, good.
I've read some shit about the second one. So I shouldn't have read the fucking reviews because I hate going in with presuppositions. But god damn it, I'll be seeing it in 6 hours.
I'm glad to hear that you liked the first one because I don't want this to be just a bunch of like, yeah, we all hated it. But luckily we have Ryan on, and Ryan loves the first one, so I think he's going to like it. But anyway, all right, cool. Thanks so much, guys. It was really a pleasure and an honor talking with you two guys. I love the podcast, and yeah, man, I'll be continuing to listen.
Cool,
Yeah,
brother.
thank you, Jared. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, later, man.
All right, see you guys.
All right, sweet. So moving on to our last segment, the Sticky Leaves segment. This is where one of us gets to recommend what it is that is giving us meaning in a world that is often devoid of meaning, which is very apt considering the chat that we just had with Jared. So, Troy, what is giving you meaning in a meaningless world?
All right, so this week, my sticky leaves is Chinese. Like the language.
Food?
The language.
Oh.
The language of Chinese.
Okay.
Because apparently, I just found this out recently. I mean, I've known for a long time that there's a huge contingent of basketball fans who are Chinese.
Yes.
A lot of people in that country, and a lot of people like basketball. And it came to light, and you may have seen this because I retweeted it into oblivion, I believe. But there was a series of nicknames that the internet people of China have dubbed NBA players with. And they are some of the most fantastic nicknames. Because knowing nothing about Chinese, and I don't know how to speak it, nor do I know anything about how the characters work, it's a pretty illustrative language, right? It's a little bit less sort of building block conceptual than the Greek and Latin based languages like English, right? It's much more illustrative
okay.
and picture based. This may be total bullshit, but it seems that way, at least, right? So their nicknames are just fantastic. So for instance, Steph Curry, his nickname is Fucks the Sky in Chinese, which is incredible.
Is that because he just shoots the ball like high in the air? And like the ball's always in the air?
Because he has the softest shot, right? Other than Dirk Nowitzki, Steph has the softest shot. And he often shoots off balance, but still finds a way to make it incredibly soft. Like he never fires it like a frozen rope to the basket. So it's kind of like he's caressing and like sexing up the sky. It's amazing. It's a great nickname.
Okay. So wait, do you know what it is in Chinese? Like, can you say it phonetically?
No, of course not.
Does it say that?
Well, yeah.
Oh, it doesn't have it?
I have the list up here, and it's like let's see, Kuli, something else. I don't remember what else. Or maybe it's just Kuli.
Okay, we won't worry about it. Kuli.
Giannis Antetokounmpo, right, the Greek freak. His nickname is Letters Bro. Just Letters Bro.
Because he has so many letters in
Because
his
he
name.
has so many letters in his name.
Oh, Jesus.
Manu
Okay.
Ginobili, that's the Argentinian on the Spurs. His nickname is the Demon Blade.
Because
he's
he
a
like
slasher.
slashes? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's great. Shaquille O'Neal is the Giant Shark, which just, I don't know why, but that's pretty great.
I don't know why the shark, but he is giant.
Yeah, he's giant. Klay Thompson is the Buddha, and the reason is because he has a hairstyle that's similar to the Chinese Buddha.
I thought it was gonna be because he's like so like stoic
Yeah, that's what I thought
or like
too. Yeah,
calm.
no, just the hair.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
Carmelo Anthony is Melon because it sounds like mellow, which is his actual nickname in English.
Okay.
Kevin Durant is School Bag Do because he used to wear a backpack, a small little like he was like a backpack rapper back in the day. Remember that?
Yeah, he was. That's right. Okay.
Charles Barkley was the Flying Pig, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Dirk Nowitzki is the German Panzer tank. Tony Parker is the little French sports car, which I just love the idea of saying that whole thing.
Which is also like kind of derogatory, but kind of amazing.
Dr. J, Julius Irving is J PhD, which is pretty great. I just want to say that from now.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just a whole bunch of these, and they're just so illustrative. Steve Nash is Son of the Wind, which is just gorgeous. He always had his long hair flowing in the wind, right? Because he had the long like a hipster hair, like I do.
I was gonna say, it kind of looks like your hair right now.
Yeah,
Troy.
I've been called Steve Nash. I'm 6'3", 180, just like Steve Nash is. So he.
It's so funny that you because you're obviously taller than I am, and you say 6'3", 180, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forget that you're big, and I always think of Steve Nash as being small, but that's only in relation to everybody else on the court. He's not really a small man. He's still actually a rather tall human.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of nicknames. If you want to go on Twitter, the guy who compiled all these, his handle is @Nick_Caper, Kapur, and he's got a whole bunch of different nicknames. I think he compiled this somewhere on Reddit too. If you just search Chinese NBA nicknames for the last month or so, you'll find it. And it's pretty great. So shout out to all the basketball fans in China. Thank you for putting together amazing nicknames like that for me to use in casual conversation and confuse everybody.
Yeah. Who's the greatest slam dunk competitor of all time? JPHD.
JPHD.
All right, sweet. So we're going to wrap up the episode this week, brother?
Yep.
Cool, man. Well, you can find us on Twitter at owls_at_dawn. You can email us, owls@dawnpodcast@gmail.com with any questions. If you could like and leave us a 5-star, what is it? Leave us a 5-star rating and a review on iTunes. That'd be really awesome. Feel free to comment on owls@dawn.com. You can leave remarks underneath the audio. Thank you for finding the word brain. Anything else?
Oh, just thanks again to Jared for coming on. That was a real treat. And talk to you guys next week, yeah?
Yeah, brother. Anything else you got to say? I feel like there's always something. I can never remember, but there's something.
About what?
I don't know, that you have to say to the world.
Oh, yeah. Here it is. Go and fuck the sky. Das Vidania, Amerikanski.